Rachel adjusted her seatbelt as she navigated Austin's busy morning traffic. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing through the tasks awaiting her at work. She couldn't shake the sense of dread growing in her chest, a familiar tension she felt every weekday morning. Did I double-check that email to my manager? She thought. What if they found a mistake? Her stomach churned at the idea of being called out in the team meeting. Rachel was a 28-year-old marketing coordinator at a fast-paced tech company. From the outside, her life seemed enviable. She worked for one of the city's most innovative firms, had a close-knit group of friends, and lived in a cozy downtown apartment. But under the surface, Rachel was battling a relentless force: workplace anxiety. No matter how hard she worked, she always felt like she was falling short. Across the country in Boston, Mike sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen. He had an important presentation to prepare for his team, but instead, he found himself spiraling into worst-case scenarios. What if I freeze during the meeting? What if they think I don't know what I'm talking about? These thoughts paralyzed him, making it impossible to focus. Mike, a 40-year-old project manager, had built a reputation for being dependable and efficient. Yet lately, he felt like an imposter. Every small mistake loomed large in his mind, reinforcing the belief that he wasn't good enough. Rachel and Mike's stories are strikingly familiar to millions of Americans. The workplace, which should be a place of growth and accomplishment, had become a source of constant stress for them. Both were trapped in cycles of anxiety, where every task, meeting, and email felt like a potential minefield. Rachel worried about being seen as incompetent, double and triple checking her work to avoid even minor errors. Mike, on the other hand, avoided taking on new challenges altogether, afraid that any misstep would expose him as a fraud. This emotional conflict, common yet deeply personal, manifests in various ways. For Rachel, anxiety showed up as over-preparation. She stayed late at the office, endlessly revising presentations and checking her work. Even when she went home, her mind wouldn't stop racing. She replayed conversations, wondering if she had said the wrong thing, and woke up in the middle of the night worrying about the next day. For Mike, anxiety took the form of procrastination and avoidance. He delayed starting tasks, convinced he needed the perfect idea before he could begin. This hesitation made his workload pile up, which only added to his stress. Their lives before addressing these challenges were marked by exhaustion and self-doubt. Rachel felt invisible at work despite her efforts, often thinking, if I were better, I wouldn't have to work this hard to be noticed. Her anxiety began spilling into her personal life. She declined social invites, afraid she'd be too tired or distracted to enjoy herself. Mike's anxiety affected his relationships too. He snapped at his family over small things, the frustration of his unprocessed stress boiling over at home. Both Rachel and Mike knew something had to change, but neither could see a clear path forward. The solution, as it turns out, wasn't about eliminating stress entirely. Stress is a natural part of any job. Instead, Rachel and Mike needed to learn how to manage their anxiety, turning it from an overwhelming force into a signal they could use to improve their well-being. The first step was understanding that their anxiety didn't make them weak, it made them human. With the right tools and mindset, they could regain control of their work lives and even use their anxiety to fuel productivity and creativity. But what if they hadn't found a solution? What if Rachel continued pushing herself to exhaustion and Mike kept avoiding challenges? The nightmare scenario loomed large. Rachel risked burnout, which could lead to serious health issues or even force her to leave a career she loved. Mike's avoidance could stagnate his career, making him feel stuck and unfulfilled. Both faced the potential of strained relationships, declining mental health, and a life dominated by fear. The good news is they didn't let it come to that. Rachel discovered simple strategies to calm her racing thoughts and approach her work with clarity. Mike learned to reframe his anxiety, taking small, manageable steps to overcome his fear of failure. Their lives after adopting these techniques were transformative. Rachel began speaking up confidently in meetings, knowing that her ideas were just as valuable as anyone else's. Mike started taking calculated risks, earning respect and recognition from his team. Work no longer felt like a battlefield for either of them. It became a place of growth and accomplishment. Rachel and Mike's journeys remind us that workplace anxiety doesn't have to control our lives. By recognizing and addressing it, we can find a path forward, one that leads to confidence, balance, and success. Let's expand and enrich this section with more vivid storytelling, deeper emotions, and relatable scenarios while addressing the objections more thoroughly. When Rachel first heard the phrase, managing workplace anxiety, in a podcast recommended by a colleague, she rolled her eyes. "Right," she muttered to herself, sitting on her couch after another exhausting day. "Like I have time for that." Her inbox was overflowing, and the thought of taking a moment to relax felt like an impossible luxury. Meanwhile, Mike, sitting in his quiet Boston home office, stared at the same sentence of his report for the third time. His wife had asked him to come downstairs for dinner, but he couldn't. "I have too much to do," he thought, even though the pile of work in front of him never seemed to shrink no matter how many late nights he put in. For both Rachel and Mike, workplace anxiety wasn't just a fleeting feeling, it was woven into their daily routines. It wasn't until they began exploring solutions that they realized how deeply rooted their objections were. Each of these objections represented a barrier that kept them locked in cycles of stress, avoidance, and overwork. But addressing these objections allowed them to see the possibilities for change. Rachel's anxiety often started before she even reached the office. Her morning routine was filled with dread as she mentally rehearsed the day's tasks, presenting a new campaign idea to her team, responding to emails she had put off, and, her least favorite, attending a feedback session with her manager. As she pulled into the parking lot, she gripped the steering wheel, her mind spiraling with thoughts like, "What if I say something stupid? What if they think I'm not good at my job?" The stress felt inescapable. Mike's version of this objection was different. As a project manager, he was used to being the go-to guy for solving problems, but that constant demand wore him down. He would often joke with colleagues, "I'm just here to put out fires." But deep down, he felt like the stress of his role was taking over his life. He didn't see how he could possibly control the stress when his job seemed built around chaos. Both Rachel and Mike learned that while they couldn't change their external environments, they could change how they responded to them. Rachel worked on identifying her stress triggers. She realized her anxiety peaked before team meetings and during feedback sessions. With guidance, she began preparing specific grounding exercises for these moments, like deep breathing before entering the room and writing down 3 positive things about her work each day to remind herself of her strengths. Mike, on the other hand, began rethinking his relationship with his role. He started delegating more tasks to his team, realizing that his need to handle everything himself was driven by his anxiety about appearing weak. With time, he saw that trusting his team didn't diminish his leadership. It strengthened it. Both found that by shifting their focus to what they could control, they felt more empowered, even in stressful situations. Rachel's fear of falling behind showed up in the form of overwork. She stayed late, skipped breaks, and constantly checked her email, even on weekends. "I can't relax when there's so much to do," she told herself, but the reality was that her productivity was suffering. She was so exhausted by mid-week that her work quality started slipping, which only made her more anxious. Mike's fear was more subtle but equally damaging. He avoided taking time for himself because he equated busyness with success. "If I'm not the first person in the office and the last person out, people might think I'm not committed," he thought. This belief kept him tethered to his desk, even when his mind was begging for a break. Rachel and Mike both learned that their fear of falling behind was a misconception rooted in their anxiety. Rachel started using a productivity technique called the Pomodoro method, where she worked in focused intervals of 25 minutes, followed by 5-minute breaks. At first she was skeptical. Taking breaks feels counterproductive, she said. But to her surprise, the breaks left her feeling more refreshed and focused. By the end of the day, she was actually completing more work than before. Mike took a different approach. He began setting hard stops at the end of his workday. At 6 p.m., he closed his laptop, no matter what was left undone. The first week was hard. He felt guilty, like he was letting his team down. But over time, he realized his evenings became moments of connection with his family, and his mornings became more productive because he started the day feeling rested. Both Rachel and Mike had attempted to address their stress in the past, but felt like nothing worked. Rachel tried yoga, but the slow pace made her feel more restless. Mike downloaded a meditation app, but he quickly gave up when his mind wouldn't stop racing. What Rachel and Mike didn't realize was that managing anxiety isn't about forcing yourself into someone else's method. It's about finding what works for you. Rachel discovered that her active mind responded better to journaling than sitting still. By writing down her worries each evening, she found she could let them go more easily. Mike, on the other hand, found success in physical activities like jogging, where the repetitive motion helped quiet his thoughts. Through trial and error, both learned that anxiety management required persistence and personalization. They weren't failures because previous methods hadn't worked. They just hadn't found the right fit yet. Rachel and Mike's breakthroughs didn't happen overnight, but each small step brought them closer to reclaiming their work lives. By addressing these objections, they realized that workplace anxiety wasn't something they had to endure. It was something they could manage. For Rachel, this meant leaving work on time without guilt. For Mike, it meant showing up for his family without the weight of unfinished tasks pulling him back to his desk. Their stories remind us that the biggest barriers to managing anxiety often lie in our own minds, and that overcoming them is the first step toward lasting change. As Rachel and Mike reflected on their journeys, they began to see their workplace anxiety in a new light. What once felt like an inescapable part of their professional lives now seemed manageable, something they could address with intentionality, patience, and the right strategies. Their transformation wasn't just about feeling better. It was about reclaiming control over their time, energy, and well-being. Dr. Vale often reminded his patients of a simple truth. Anxiety isn't a sign of weakness, it's a signal. For Rachel and Mike, understanding this concept was a turning point. They realized that their anxiety wasn't there to sabotage them. It was there to alert them to areas in their lives that needed attention and care. Rachel's and Mike's stories highlight the importance of recognizing and addressing workplace anxiety, not as a flaw, but as a natural response to stress. Through their journeys, they learned valuable lessons that are applicable to anyone facing similar challenges. Anxiety is manageable with the right tools. Both Rachel and Mike discovered that anxiety wasn't something they had to eliminate entirely. It was something they could work with. Rachel found success in structured techniques like the Pomodoro method and journaling, while Mike benefited from physical activity and setting clear boundaries. Their methods weren't identical, but that was the point. Each of them tailored their approach to what worked best for them. Small changes create big shifts. Neither Rachel nor Mike overhauled their lives overnight. Instead, they made small, intentional adjustments. Rachel began taking 5-minute breaks during her workday, and Mike committed to closing his laptop at 6 p.m. These seemingly minor changes had a profound impact, helping them feel more grounded and less overwhelmed. Relaxation is a productivity booster. Both characters learned that taking time to recharge didn't slow them down. It made them more effective. Rachel found that stepping away from her desk allowed her to return to tasks with fresh energy, while Mike realized that his evenings spent with family gave him the clarity to tackle problems more efficiently the next morning. Imagine what life could look like if you followed a similar path. Picture yourself walking into work feeling calm and focused, ready to handle whatever challenges come your way. You approach meetings with confidence, knowing that even if things don't go perfectly, you have the tools to recover and move forward. You're no longer weighed down by the fear of failure or the pressure to be perfect. In the evenings, you're able to fully disconnect from work. Instead of mentally replaying the day's events or worrying about tomorrow, you spend time with loved ones or indulge in hobbies that bring you joy. Your mind feels clearer, your body more rested, and your outlook on life brighter. This isn't a fantasy. It's a reality that Rachel and Mike achieved through small, consistent changes. And it's a reality that's available to you too. Now it's time to ask yourself, what's stopping me from taking the first step? If you've ever found yourself in Rachel or Mike's position, feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or like workplace anxiety is controlling your life, this is your opportunity to make a change. Here's what you can do today to begin transforming your relationship with workplace anxiety. Identify your triggers. Take a few minutes to reflect on the situations or tasks that make you feel the most anxious. Is it giving presentations, responding to emails, meeting deadlines? Knowing your triggers is the first step toward managing them. Start small. Pick one strategy to try this week. It could be setting a timer for short breaks, practicing a grounding technique, or setting a clear boundary around your work hours. Remember, progress starts with small steps. Experiment and adjust. Not every technique will work for you, and that's okay. The key is to keep experimenting until you find what resonates with you. Whether it's journaling, mindfulness, or even something unconventional like listening to music during tasks, the goal is to discover what helps you feel more at ease. Remind yourself of your worth. Rachel and Mike both struggled with self-doubt, but they learned to reframe their thinking. You are not defined by your mistakes or your productivity. You are valuable simply because you exist. The question now is, will you take the first step? The tools to manage your anxiety are within reach, but it's up to you to use them. You don't have to have everything figured out today, you just have to begin. Rachel and Mike didn't transform their lives overnight, and neither will you. But with patience, persistence, and a willingness to try, you can break free from the grip of workplace anxiety. You can reclaim your confidence, enjoy your work, and find balance in your life. So what will your first step be? Will you set a timer for a 5-minute break? Will you write down one thing you're proud of today? Will you commit to closing your laptop at a reasonable hour? Whatever it is, start small and start today. As Dr. Vail often said, anxiety might be loud, but it doesn't have to run the show. You're in charge and you've got this.